Let's start with Bruno, because I think, he is, I'm going to go simply by the smaller transfer fee first. But I also think it's a really fascinating transfer because it's quite a significant package, right? 87.5 million euros. I think there's add-ons there too.
Mm.
And that always, brings up the price. The same is true of Jan Diamant. It's 125 plus 10 plus 5, right? Which we add when the time comes. But also 28 years old, significantly over market value, central midfielder, player who, for Brazil at the World Cup didn't always do his best, missed a really crucial penalty against Norway, right, in the game that they got eliminated in. But the market is what it is, especially for central midfielders, Premier League proven central midfielders that move within the Premier League. And I think some of the prices that we have seen in that regard are absolutely wild at the moment.
Hmm. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk this summer about the sheer inflation of transfer fees in the Premier League, particularly midfielders. Obviously, Elliot Anderson is the kind of poster boy for that due to his 135 million euro move to Manchester City. Tottenham have undoubtedly added to that with Sandro Tonali for 108 million euros, Mateus Fernandes for 99 million euros. You could also probably include Morgan Rogers in there for 138 million euros. I know he's more of a more attacking player, but he's still technically a midfielder. So I guess, when Arsenal came calling for Bruno Guimarães, even though Newcastle knew he wanted to leave, even though it seemed inevitable due to the fact that Newcastle already lost a number of players, it also felt like Newcastle would also be able to kind of name their price, and Arsenal have paid it. And remarkably, Manu, it breaks a record held since 2001 when Zinedine Zidane moved to Real Madrid for 77.5 million euros. And now Guimaraes becomes the most expensive centre midfielder aged 20 or over in the history of the sport. I'm not sure that's a record that any football fan or any football player really wants. Maybe it is. Maybe it's some kind of rebel in that. But it's, you look at the other players on that list. It's Pjanic to Barcelona for 60 million euros, which less said about that, the better. Casemiro to Manchester United for 70 million euros, who I think by the end of his tenure at Old Trafford, he had certainly plenty of kind of fans at Man United. He was always good for a big game goal. But there's also Palinha, 51 million euros to Bayern Munich, which will probably go down as the club's maybe most expensive flop. And then, there's Fabinho to Saudi Arabia, which doesn't mean a huge amount. So, it's not a great list to be on. Admittedly, Zidane's at the top of it, and anyone besides Zidane's a nice thing, isn't it? He obviously did very well at Real Madrid, but it's interesting that it is interesting, man, how much he's cost and the fact that Arsenal have gone out and spent that much money on a 28-year-old. I think it shows that Arteta and the club itself have said, well, we've won the Premier League. We got there thanks to some tremendously hard work and some excellent performances, but maybe Arteta was looking at the way that Man City were a wee bit off their usual form. Maybe he's looking at clubs like Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, thinking they might look better this season. And Arsenal have said, let's just get proven quality in the door to help us maintain our performances from last year, but also defend that Premier League title.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe also make that extra step to win the Champions League, right? They fell so very short, so close to PSG. Penalties is really what it took to pull those two teams apart, and just to have that extra beef or strength in midfield, I think is something that makes a lot of sense, because like everyone always looks at PSG and looks at all the attacking talent, but they forget that they also have like 4 absolute studs in central midfield, right? And they can really play 3 of them, and they have 4 of them. And I think that is maybe the realization here too, that in order to win the biggest competition, the Champions League, you need that absolute power and depth in midfield. And I think that's another realization that came in here. And they're not the only club to realize this. When you look at the lists of transfers this summer, right? Most of the top signings or transfers this summer have been defensive midfielders or central midfielders. The only ones in our top 6 that Bruno Guimarães is 6th, right? That are not are Diomande and Rodgers. So I think that's a really fascinating trend as well.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point actually about the PSG comparison, because I think Arteta probably came away from that Champions League final thinking, it was a final where he was more or less not forced to play Miles Lewis-Skelly, but chose to play him over Zubamendi. It was also a period in the season where Declan Rice was really beginning to look like he was running on fumes. And I don't think anyone would begrudge the fact that Arsenal didn't win the Champions League after a really grueling Premier League campaign, but maybe Arteta stepped away from that season thinking, if we had another top midfielder in there, not one who could have just stepped in for Declan Rice, for example, or Zubamendi in the final, but could play 20 or 30 games a season so that Declan Rice looked fully fit at the end of the season, it would have made a big difference to them in that Champions League final. And, I think that's probably what Bruno Guimarães comes in to do, to be honest with you. I think he is, if you look at his stats, he almost is like this kind of like for like replacement for Declan Rice. He's obviously not going to replace Declan Rice, but he can play alongside him or slot in Declan Rice's role. And then, whether it's Miles Lewis-Skelly, although he has been heavily linked with a move away from the club this week, or perhaps more likely Zubamendi alongside him. So I think Arteta likes to have those 3 options, and technically Mikel Merino is also there as well, even though he has kind of played as a backup striker for most of his time at Arsenal.
Or for Spain.
So it's almost like Guimarães isn't he isn't coming in as a starter, but he also isn't coming in as a backup. He's something between. And I think it'll probably mean a lot less minutes for Declan Rice, for Zubamendi, and then I guess Guimarães as well. But as a result, Arsenal will have 3 super fit and presumably healthy midfielders throughout the whole season, rather than this real over-reliance on Declan Rice this season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's also probably a reaction to the fact that Man City signed Elliot Anderson, right? Strengthening their own midfield. So yeah, really interesting. I curious to see how it plays out. And for Newcastle, I wonder if they have any players left at this point.
Yeah, well, for Newcastle, that's a story for another day, I think.